Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heart lines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker. Close to 1 in 4 American women experience the silent grief of miscarriage, stillbirth, or ectopic pregnancy loss. Women not only feel alone, but face psychological and physiological grief as a result of losing an unborn child. Most are completely unprepared for the physical and emotional turmoil. When you add the stress of a worldwide pandemic and life-altering culture, the weight is almost unbearable. Our next guest knows about the pain of miscarriage from personal experience of losing 2 of her own. Dr. Sarah Philpott is the ECPA award-nominated author of Love Baby, 31 Devotions Helping You Grieve and Cherish Your Child After Pregnancy Loss. A farm wife and mom to 4, she is a founder of Love Baby Pregnancy Loss Support Group. You can visit with Sarah at allamericanmom.net, where she writes about her family, life on a cattle farm in the South, and learning to cherish God's provisions and joy and sorrow. Joining us now to talk about her book, Love Baby, 31 Devotions Helping You Grieve and Cherish Your Child After Pregnancy Loss, is Dr. Sarah Philpott. Sarah, so good to see you again.
So good to see you as well.
And we're delighted to have you back on the program. Take us back to the really early years of your faith and what ultimately came into play as you dealt with the grief that came along with childbirth and the loss of 2, and having to come face to face with questions about what you knew about God, what you knew about God's love, and was it actually real? And is God's love real unless it's tested? Is God's love real unless there's a problem? Or is God's love real all the time? So take us back to that early journey for you into building the foundation to your faith that sustained you through all of this and this beautiful, thriving family you have today.
Oh, thank you so much. I was one of those that was very fortunate that I was raised in a Christian home and raised in church, and I accepted Jesus as my Lord and Savior from a very young age. I attended a small country church every Sunday, just felt the presence of the Lord very early on, and that faith sustained me through elementary school, high school, through ups and downs, and as we all go through grievous situations. And I always relied on the Lord. But after the birth of my first son, when he was 2, we decided we wanted to expand our family. We wanted to have more children, and we thought that would be, as society kind of alludes to, a pretty easy process. And my husband and I were just devastated after we found out that our second child, that I miscarried our child. And then we went to find out a few months later that I was pregnant again. And we were, I guess the best way to say it is, we were excited but also nervous about finding out that we were pregnant with another child. Of course, we welcomed God's blessing in that, but the nervousness about what could happen obviously was an overwhelming thought process in my mind, and unfortunately we lost that pregnancy, that child as well. And at that point, I just felt such a big, heavy grief, and I really did start questioning what role my faith played in this. Who was going to help me when I felt so saddened? Was this little tiny child that was knit in my womb that nobody saw but me, was it worthy of grieving? Did God see this as a grief worthy of grieving? And I never abandoned my faith. I know a lot of people do question it, and that's okay. I think we all go through things like that. But what I really learned through that process was that the only person that I could rely on was God, that I was looking for help from my husband, through my family, through my friends, and of course they were a wonderful support system. But even though I had all that love, I still felt a loneliness. So that is a time when I truly realized that I had to abide in him, that I had to abide in God, and that I had to just start reading my Bible. I had to talk to God every single second of the day whenever those sad, anxious thoughts would come in my mind, that it was him that I should go to. And then I started journaling my thoughts and writing everything down. And I think through this, my faith has only grown stronger because I realize that it is truly he that can give us the peace that passes understanding. And even though on the other side of this, there is still a pain that our children are in heaven and not with us on earth, we have that comfort that they're with God, but our earthly desires, we still have a sad point about it, but we can always direct that sadness to him, to God.
Back during President Ronald Reagan's pregnancy, he created this Infant and Pregnancy Loss Awareness Month. Okay. Can you turn your speakers down just a little bit? We're getting some feedback. And so October
Absolutely.
is Infant and Pregnancy Loss Awareness Month for the purpose of recognizing and raising awareness of the unique grief of parents who have excuse me, who have experienced infant loss, miscarriage, and stillbirth. But even in acknowledging that does not take the pain away, does not take the grief away. And no one really knows what to say. A lot of times it's early on in the pregnancy and it hasn't even been announced outside of the immediate family. So it's not a public matter. And that compounds it because you don't really have the community support that could address it with you. You make the decision. Do we tell anybody? Do we share it with anybody? Lots of ways that you have to struggle with the news. And then in your case, you had back-to-back miscarriages. And that would send anyone into a dark night of the soul, of wondering whether or not doubt is a lack of faith, whether or not doubt is offensive to God, whether or not you have crossed over to that questioning, how could a loving God take from my womb this unborn baby that he said, I knew you before you were in your mother's womb. I had plans for you. And the plans for these two babies were not to be fulfilled here on earth, but to be fulfilled in heaven. How do we support people? How do we comfort them? Or can we comfort them?
I think that, yes, I think, how can we? I think there is no really roadmap for this type of grief. And I think that's one of the things that was great about Ronald Reagan recognizing an Infant and Pregnancy Loss Awareness Month, because at least it brought it out of the shadows and into the daylight. And it's taken this many decades since that time period for us to really, I think, have more of a public discourse around pregnancy loss. A lot of the women that I've talked to when I was writing my book, they spoke from experiences of delivering stillbirths in the 1950s and 1960s. And their doctors were just thinking mainly with a scientific mind. And a few moms come to mind. And one particular one, she said that she had a full-term stillbirth. And her husband, of course, wasn't present in the hospital room at that time. But the doctor came out to the waiting room and told the father that, well, sometimes we lose one. And that was how he announced to the father that the child was stillborn. And it was just kind of brushed under the table, and that was that. So I think as a society, it's been something hard to talk about because often the grief has been marginalized. So I think in today's present time, I'm so appreciative that we are talking about it because it normalizes these feelings. It lets women and families know how prevalent miscarriage and stillbirth are, but still how we need to be supportive of ourselves and how we need to support others. Just like when a father or mother passes away, usually a family will, rally around the child, bring casseroles. I'm from the South, so you feed you feed the pain. There's funerals, and we really have to do the same type of thing for a mother and a family who experiences pregnancy loss. If she has been vocal, and if you do know that she's faced this loss, I think it's a wonderful thing to send flowers, to send a note, to send messages of how much you love her and how you are thinking of her, and to do some of our normal processes of grieving, because a lot of times women can, unfortunately, as all humans can, get stuck in that process of grief and not know how to move forward. And the Bible tells us that we have to mourn. So we have to go through this process of mourning. And so I think sending, especially at this time of a pandemic with COVID, where we are encouraged to be apart, one of the things that we can do would be to send a care package to a family member or a friend who's experienced pregnancy loss. And a lot of times I like to send a journal so the mother can write down her thoughts or record information about her baby, a pen, a candle, just some nice tokens of love to show your support in a tangible method.
Sarah, how do we address that thought process of guilt, of what did I do to cause this? What did I miss? What did I do wrong? What did I eat wrong? What medication did I take wrong? What did I do to contribute to this? Because if God saw fit to allow me to get pregnant, why didn't He allow this child to come into the world? And I think people go to that place where, okay, I'm going to do an inventory of what I did. And that's a very private. They may not even share it with their husband. This secret place that they go to that they're not really willing to talk about because they don't want to have it dismissed. They don't want to be placated. They don't want there to be there needs to be a certain amount of validation in saying your feelings are real, so let's look at this together. You didn't do anything. You didn't take anything. You didn't put the child in danger. This is not something that medically or circumstantially that you caused to happen. There's a certain amount of comfort in that, but then there's a certain amount of struggle in that inner battle that says, okay, if I didn't do anything wrong, and if the doctors didn't do anything wrong, then what happened? And do we find out answers? Is there the post-examination? Is there the testing and the blood work and the other aspects of this that can identify? Or do we have to live in the unknown?
I think there's a lot of different circumstances. So unfortunately, for most all moms, research shows that self-blame is one of the first thing that happens after you've had a miscarriage or a stillbirth. But I always like to remind moms that this self-blame is a falsehood. Most often, miscarriage is the result of a chromosomal abnormality that the mother did absolutely nothing wrong, even though she and myself, I racked my brain over, did I eat something wrong? Did I drink coffee when I shouldn't have? Did I do this? Did I do that? And I finally had to find comfort in the medical knowledge that a chromosomal abnormality is nothing that I did wrong. And that also goes for stillbirth. Most often, it's very rare cases that the mother has done something, barring a drug or an alcohol situation. It is just a trial that unfortunately happened. So once we find these medical answers, and a lot of women can go on to have medical testing or an autopsy. Sometimes it can be something as traumatic as a cord injury as to why there was a stillbirth. But after we've wrestled with these medical reasons, then you're right. We still have that weight of the spiritual why. Why did this happen? And unfortunately, I don't think until we get to heaven that we'll ever know why we are living in this grand plan that included pregnancy loss. So I think searching for the why we is an opportunity where we truly have to put our faith in God. And we have to remind ourselves also that not only medically or physically did we do anything wrong, but spiritually we also need to remind ourselves that sin does not cause something such as pregnancy loss. God reminds us in the Bible that we are all going to face trials. And unfortunately, this is an extremely traumatic and soul-jarring trial that happens to us while we are on earth. And we have to walk forward from it, even though it is extremely excruciating to live, knowing that we also have a piece of our hearts in the form of a child in heaven. One of the things that I like to remind moms when I speak with them is that heaven is described as the most perfect place ever. And the definition of perfection in my mind is also getting to hear baby giggles and baby coos. So I like to tell moms that we have been the mothers chosen to deliver these precious babies into heaven, and that we have to have trust that our babies are being taken care of right now. And their first vision they've ever seen is being with God, and that we have a new due date. When we get to heaven, we will get to see our children. So I do think wrestling with this medically, there's so many places we can go to try to find medical answers. And of course, I believe that your own personal physician is the first place to start with that, because we don't want to go down a rabbit hole of Googling symptoms and reasons. So we have to know that we didn't do anything wrong as mothers physically, and that God did not do this to us because for any sin we have committed. Jesus Christ was perfect, and yet he still had trials on this earth. So that's how I've reconciled the search for why, knowing that I did physically nothing wrong, as have most moms, and also that spiritually we're just going to have to live with this faith over the fear of the unknown and the why. We just have to keep looking forward and living our life with the life God has provided us.
Every good gift comes from God, and we have to look at all these things as a gift. Now, you've had 3 children, I believe, since the 2 miscarriages.
Yeah.
So obviously, you found within yourself the hope and the reconciliation that God's ways are not our ways and his thoughts are higher than our thoughts, and that whatever his plan and purpose was fulfilled, for he is sovereign, and that if he wanted you to expand the family, he would make that happen, and he did so. And so you have 3 other children. So you're really the mother of 6, 4 here, 2 in heaven, and celebrate their lives. That's a kind of faith that a lot of people that breaks up families, or one believes that, and I think it's husbands that have no understanding, and so they can't relate because for them it's death. And they process it as, I don't understand it. You can tell me all you want about faith and God's plans, but here I have my heart set, and I lost a child, then I lost another child, and this is not what I signed up for. And they abandon the family and the marriage, when if they would just stick around till chapter 4, which is your next child, they would see that chapters 4, 5, 6 were all being written when before chapter 1 was written. How important is it to engage and to have a very open line of communication? I know that grief causes us to pull within. We're hurt, we're grieving, and our grief is first for ourselves. Our hopes are dashed, and we tend not to think of another. But there was a father as well. And most of the literature is written to the moms of a miscarriage, the moms of someone who can't conceive, the women who have had stillbirth. The dad books, because the dads don't read that many books, and handing a dad a book on how to navigate your wife's miscarriage, not flying off the shelf. Men aren't wired to do that. But it's a really important factor in all this, because they're just as much as part of the grief, and they know nothing. Guys know nothing. We didn't carry that baby. We didn't feel the chemical changes. We didn't feel the bond. We didn't feel any of those things. We didn't feel the morning sickness. We didn't feel any of that. We heard about it or watched it, or depending on if we were really engaged or not, we might have even gone to work earlier and stayed at work later, because we just didn't want to navigate the living, breathing hurricane of hormones that stirs. I'm the grandparent of a 15-month-old baby, and I went through every day of the pregnancy with my daughter. We either talked or FaceTimed, and I wanted to know, because she was adopted, and I only knew her birth mother for 6 weeks. So I didn't get to go through a pregnancy but 6 weeks. And I was with that birth mother every day for 6 weeks, and I went to every appointment and saw every sonogram, and I talked to this child, and I was very much engaged, but I couldn't even imagine 9 months, 40 weeks. But the only thing I can relate to was the waiting period of hearing from the courts that it was final, that the baby wasn't going to be taken away from me. So I can kind of empathize with the sense of losing a baby. And ours got to be complicated, and instead of it being 3 months, it wound up being 9 months. And I remember leaving the courtroom and tears pouring. I could hardly drive home. And I sat on my couch and I held this 9-month-old child, and she was just drenched with my tears, because it was finally the letdown of pure fear, anxiety, and emotion that at any day I could have gotten a phone call saying the birth mother's changed her mind and this child you bonded with is going to be gone. But to have that moment where I knew that she could never be taken away from me. I went through 9 months of fear and anxiety that I could lose her. So it was kind of very, very personal to me. I could relate. But I don't think most men can. And that's a challenge, because although you had a partner in the conception of the child, and you have a coach or champion alongside of you during the pregnancy, they don't have that bond and that attachment that the mother has, and don't understand when there is profound grief. They don't understand. And this is part of this awareness, is we've got to include them into this, or we're just going to perpetuate the lack of understanding and the lack of connection. I think that your devotional, Love Baby, 31 devotionals helping you grieve and cherish your child after pregnancy loss. The you is plural, you. You and your spouse. Not you as the mother trying to navigate, but drawing in your husband or partner. Your husband. We're a biblical program, so we're not looking for promoting out of wedlock. But that's a real deal. I don't know how your experience was, but we're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about the reality of men in this process, and not what you can just do to give comfort to another one, but how, husbands, you can give comfort to your wife, and how you can get engaged and involved in this, not looking for blame, not looking for misunderstanding, but joining together as you were created as one. For this reason, a man will leave his mother and father and cleave to his wife, and they will become one. This is a shared experience, although it's much harder for a man to relate because he doesn't have that chemical change and then the chemical reversal. So you got the one influx, the flood, and then you have the removal. And that's pretty radical too. And I don't think people really understand that. We're going to take a short break. We're talking with Dr. Sarah Philpott, author of Love Baby, 31 Devotions, helping you grieve and cherish your child after pregnancy loss. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back. Shalom. I'm Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker, inviting you to join me and my special featured guests twice per month with Rabbi Zeb Parat and Carl Gallups, and monthly with Dr. Michael Heiser, Dr. Michael Lake, Dr. Timothy Jennings, Dr. Mark Baker, Dr. Jeffrey Johnson, Drs. Michelle and Mark Sherwood, Dr. Kim Moss, Derek Gilbert, Peter Rosenberger, Brandon Gallups, Steve Fair, Stephen Black, and Sean Tabbitt for in-depth insights into Israel, prophecy, the unseen realm, the brain, spiritual warfare, overcoming shame, mysteries of the Bible, prophetic insights, the sensational and the supernatural, caregiving, addiction recovery, understanding the divided heart, same-sex attraction, and much more. We're proud to feature some of the greatest biblical minds from both Israel and around the United States. Check out our featured guest lineup and 24/7 feed on ignitinganation.com or watch by topic on any device with our free apps. If you can't find what you need, you're just not looking in the right place. Follow us on social media and download our free apps today.
With today's smartphone technology, news, information, sports, and entertainment is widely available and almost unbounded. But what about the information that believers in Yeshua are looking for? Well, now there's an app for that. Igniting a Nation now has apps available for Android and iPhone. With our app, you'll gain access to everything you would in our website, from our featured guests to our live streaming shows. Visit Google Play or the Apple Store and download Igniting a Nation's new app today.
Shalom. I'm Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker, inviting you to join me and Israel's #1 rated guide, Edo Canaan, for our annual Israel trip. Our 2022 trip is now open for registration for our 18th trip to Israel. Our trip will take us from Tel Aviv to the Galilee, down to the Dead Sea, and 4 nights in Jerusalem. You will walk where Yeshua walked and watch the Bible turn from black and white to living color. Visit ignitinganation.com/events and download the registration form today. No, it's not too early to take advantage of our payment plan designed to fit any budget. All of our trips sell out, and we want you to experience this life-changing journey. Registration is now open for April 2nd to 13th, 2022, and we promise you, you will never read your Bible the same way again. Welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heart lines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker, and we're talking with Dr. Sarah Philpott, author of Love Baby, 31 Devotions Helping You Grieve and Cherish Your Child After Pregnancy Loss. Sarah, welcome back.
Thank you so much.
That was as I told you during the break, that was a completely spirit-filled download of something that I had never in my life, and I have ministered at pregnancy centers, I have ministered to families, I have ministered in many ways. I've interviewed about this very topic 50, 60 times. Never once did it ever occur to me of that lump who has no clue, even in a healthy pregnancy, he still doesn't know the right thing to do. He's just waiting for the next set of instructions, and he's zealous to do it, but if an original thought, we're not wired that way. Oh, I should do this, I should do that. It's that, and it's really important. Really important. Share your experience, and maybe that'll help us understand a little bit more about how important that is.
It's so important. I think the breakdown of a family can easily happen over a situation like this with grief. Like you said, a wife finds out she's pregnant. The husband is going on a series of ups and downs every single day, not knowing how to react, not going through the morning sickness, going through all the things that neither one of them knows even how to navigate. And the husband's constantly guessing how a wife might want him to react. And then all of a sudden you have this thrown in as well, and it's not ending the way you even imagined. So when I went through my loss, I remember my husband took me to the doctor's office the day that I thought something wasn't right. And he drove me there. He held my hand. I don't remember us even speaking much, but I was just comforted by his presence. And by the time we found out that I was losing our baby, I was just a ball of tears. And I remember he just held me and he comforted me, not necessarily with words, but again, just with his arms. And he just kept telling me he loved me, and that I told him that I loved him. And we had been through grievous situations in our past. His sister had actually died. She was 20 years old. She died 4 weeks before he and I got married. So we had faced that grief earlier on in our marriage, of having to navigate that. And he thankfully knew that when someone goes through grief, that no one else can grieve for them, that you just have to love someone through it. And he thankfully did. So he didn't try to force a timeline on my grief. He didn't try to give me all these ways I could stop being sad. He just knew it was a process. So I was very fortunate that I had a husband who was emotionally able to know what a grief process looks like. That I know that a lot of men haven't had an experience like that before. They don't know how to walk through grief. And a lot of moms that I've talked to, and I've actually, in the book, The Loved Baby, I did include the voices of many men, because I think it's so important that we hear from men. And not every grief process, not every mourning process is going to look the same. I have men in this book featured where they admitted they weren't even sad when their wife lost the baby. They had no emotional connection. And then they felt guilty, and they didn't want to tell their wife they didn't even feel sad. So again, that guessing game. I have men featured in the book that felt deeply, deeply saddened by the loss of this child. So they were going on their own journey of grief. I've featured one particular man in this book who was just so angry at God. So he wasn't even emotionally able to be there for his wife, because he was dealing with his own demons of being mad at God for this. So one of the things that I think is just extremely important is for us to realize that we all grieve very differently. We have to respect the way each of us grieves. I may grieve openly and want to talk to friends about it. I may want to talk to my husband, whereas my husband just doesn't want to talk about it at all. And we have to acknowledge that we all grieve differently, and that we have to respect that for each other. We can't force someone to grieve a certain way. I am really happy to know that you recognize that a father is just as much a part of this, and that we have to be inclusive as a family, because there's so many breakdowns in families that can occur from this. Last month, I was at a pregnancy and infant loss organization, and I got to speak to a room full of men and women. They invited the entire family to come and to celebrate their children in heaven together. And it was, I think, really lovely for the men to be there, because they saw other fathers and they could talk about their own experiences. And my husband says that since people know that I wrote a book about pregnancy loss, and that we have been open about it as a couple, that a lot of men will just kind of come up privately to him in our community and say, so-and-so, my wife, we lost a baby, and I've never talked about it before. So I think it's important for men to know that go to another dad who has experienced loss, and just say, we lost a baby. And you're going to find some companionship and just being able to get it out loud, to be able to speak it and say it in the presence of another male, another father who has had that same experience of not knowing how to navigate this walk with your wife. And as women, we really have to stop assuming that our husbands are mind readers. I think we do that a lot. We can be guilty of that, of getting really angry at our spouse because they didn't react a certain way that we thought they should. So for example, after you've experienced pregnancy loss, you're going to have a series of follow-up appointments with your doctor's office. And not only is it's scary to walk in there because you see all these women who are pregnant, so you're very sad that you see what you wanted, and you're also consumed with all this medical knowledge, and you're an emotional wreck. A lot of women try to just brush it off and say, oh, I don't need you to go with me, when really deep down they want their husband to go, and they want their husband to say, oh no, I'm going with you. I think this is a situation where a woman is trying to force a man to be a mind reader. So as women, we really need to take responsibility to try our best to say what's really on our hearts. We have to have that open communication. If we want our husband at an appointment with us, we need to say, I'd really like you to be there with me. I'd really like us to go on a date. I'd really like us to, whatever it may be that she desires and that he desires, that this is an opportunity for us to truly have that open communication, but also the open communication without fear of being blamed or told that you should be doing this at this point. You should be grieving this way. So we have to honor each other's grieving styles. I think we have to stop playing the mind game, the mind reading game, and we also need to encourage fathers to reach out to other fathers of loss just to be able to talk about it.
This is such a great opportunity that God has given us to become healed at the broken place. We find that often faith doesn't really become faith until it's tested. And when it's tested, we find out how strong our faith is. Genesis 22, Abraham was tested. God took him to the point of doing what God himself would eventually do, and that was to sacrifice his only son. In a marriage, the marriage can become stronger at that broken place when that broken place is healed together, which, if in your first miscarriage you actually grew closer together, then you navigated the second miscarriage in unity as opposed to as two separate individuals. And I'm going to hazard a guess that you learned in the first one how to do it because you made it through the second one on into having 3 more children after that. If we embrace the challenges that God puts in front of us, and we're reminded of that wedding ceremony where the pastor probably said a cord of 3 strands is not easily broken, that where it begins to fray, these are the duct tape moments where that cord begins to fray. But you know, duct tape is. Okay? It's never going to break at the duct tape again. It'll break on that side, it'll break on that side, but where it's duct taped together, it's never going to break again. I tell people that after 50 years of marriage, your cord of 3 strands is a 100-mile long, duct tape wrapped cord. It's no longer silver and gold, it's duct tape. And it's invincible. There's a lot to be learned from that in adversity and in grief and in difficult times, that if we would train ourselves, teach ourselves, this is the time to come together, even if we don't know how. Mm-hmm. There's no wrong way. Mm-hmm. Because there is no prescribed way to grieve. There's no prescribed way to miscarry. There's no prescribed way to respond to a stillborn child or an ectopic pregnancy. My daughter thought hers was ectopic. There were signs that it was ectopic, and so there were many panicky visits to the OB, and finally we got the report that no, everything's now, it wasn't where everything was supposed to be, but now it is where it's supposed to be. I don't know how that happened, except for incredible prayer, but the moment they say ectopic, they usually never take it back. Now they took it back and it was a perfectly normal birth. In these devotions, you kind of help navigate. Maybe this is something that should be premarital counseling. Maybe this should be introduced into the whole genre of premarital counseling. Yeah, we talk about conflict resolution, but we talk about agreeing on how we're going to raise the children, and we examine, are you a disciplinarian, are you this, or what would you like with your mom and dad, and where do you come from? But we don't even ever entertain in premarital counseling what happens if. I have a friend, we do a caregivers show. He's been taking care of his wife. He married his wife after she had already had one leg amputated. And he loved her so much that he knew that he was going to be in this caregiving role the rest of his life. And he married her that way. And she wound up having the second leg amputated. And he's been a caregiver to her for 35 years and adores her and devoted his life to caregiving and to caregivers. They went into it knowing, and that was part of the glue that kept them together, was because they had the knowledge that this was going to be a battle that they were going to have to go through together. Maybe we're missing on a very important part of, we talk about the love languages, we talk about all these other things, but do we talk about the trauma languages? Do we talk about the trauma response? Do we talk about the good news, bad news? Do we even address the potential that you want to have a family? It's wonderful. How are you going to handle it if there's a problem? News that the child has some type of genetic challenge, developmental challenge, or there's a miscarriage. I wonder if we added that to the whole 360 of the premarital concept, that we would grow stronger couples and more lasting couples and more couples equipped and less clueless men, because at least they heard the concept and they got to get introduced to the fact that, I need to develop I need to tap into it. I have that in me. It's just all covered up with dirt and smelly socks. But I really do need to clean it off and address it. I think it brings up a pretty important point, because otherwise you go through it alone. And that becomes exponentially grievous. Because it's an abandonment that you feel that maybe the Lord abandoned you and now your spouse is too. And if your body rejected the baby, how much more rejection can you possibly handle? You're changing my entire paradigm here.
No, and when we hit that stage of rejection, then we become apathetic if we're rejected so many times. And apathy, isn't it one of the number one killers of a marriage, is apathy? So I really receiving what you're saying about this should be something that is talked about in premarital counseling, just so we have that shared language, this possibility. A lot of times, even when you go to your first appointments to have a check after you found yourself pregnant, we don't discuss the possibilities of miscarriage or stillbirth even then. It seems to just come straight out of nowhere. And I think it would be powerful for families if we went ahead and started talking about this is a type of trauma that you may experience in life. And then you would feel comfortable as a couple to, if you needed additional help, to go to your religious wherever the counseling that you received before your marriage, that you know someone you can go talk to about this. And I think that would open the lines of communication so much. It really would. It could bring so much life back to so many marriages who are stuck in that point of not even knowing how to talk to each other.
I think we've struck on something really very, very important, and maybe this is something that you'll consider working with someone that does premarital counseling and add a component piece to it, or do a video that they can watch together to just say that you're taking a vow for better or for worse, in sickness and in health. This is the worse, and this is the sickness. And you go into it with this Pollyanna view that it's a vow. It's it's all going to be good. It's going to be wonderful. It's going to be glorious. And but that's not the reality. That these things do come at you, and what is devastating is the first time you've ever considered it is after it's happened. That's a surprise, that's a shock, that's a getting hit blindsided, and you're both blindsided, and there's one who is physically more invested in it than the other by nature. But you can be equally yoked, you can be equally a part of it, and I think it's part of maybe a new breakthrough that you and I can put out there in the world and say, hey, guys, pastors, this needs to be not ad nauseum, not hours and hours long, but the possibilities, preparation. We don't talk about caregiving. What if your spouse were to be in an accident? What if your spouse were to get sick? Have you considered the commitment that you have to be willing to make? We don't do that. We don't play that part. We talk about how to set arguments and families and in-laws and splitting up the holidays, but we don't talk about those other real tests of marriage. And maybe it's time we did. Sarah Philpott talked about nothing that we planned to talk about.
That's great. This was important.
This was very important, and I thank you so much for being a part of it. And hopefully we planted a lot of seeds out there to say, you know what? This is real. And I want to thank you for being so open and so being Spirit-led to just open yourself up and share with us. Sarah Philpott, author of Love Baby, 31 Devotions, helping you grieve and cherish your child after pregnancy loss, for men and for women. God bless you and thank you.
God bless you and thank you so much.
You're welcome. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth.